Welcome to the Haven Collective. I'm JR, and this is the Beacon Week for our second week in our study on pride. What is it? How do we know when we're being prideful? And most importantly, what do we do about it? Today we are reflecting on the story in Genesis 3 of the fall of humanity, where the man and the woman that God created and placed in the Garden of Eden are tempted to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But before we get to that, I want to share with you probably, it's one of the times in my life that I feel the least competent, the most incompetent, and probably the most frustrated. And it's anytime I am asked to paint a room. So this has happened, whether a friend is having me over to help with a remodel project, or if I'm working with Habitat for Humanity or doing some kind of a church service project. But I'll have my, my paint roller and my paint palette, going to town on a wall, just really getting it to the place where I think it looks great, right? I stand back and, 2 thumbs up, no problems here. And then someone who is genuinely a master painter, someone who knows what they're doing, comes in, looks at my work, and every single time they go, who did this? And I sheepishly have to confess it was me. Or I say, I don't know, someone ran in here and obviously, clearly did a bad job, right? Look at it. The reality is I don't have a trained eye when it comes to interior paint. And when I'm standing next to a master painter who's evaluating my work, they kind of point out a bunch of things that I swear, until they pointed them out, I just didn't see. I haven't been trained in how to see them. And so much to my chagrin, I'll go back over and correct all of these things. Can you imagine how foolish it would be for me to tell this master painter that they don't know what they're talking about, when it's clearly I am the one who doesn't know what he's talking about? I wouldn't dream of doing that, because when I'm helping someone paint, I'm not doing it for my own edification. I'm not trying to win the award of world's best interior painter or something foolish like that, right? I'm trying to help so that whoever's dwelling this can live in a space that they can be proud of, not a space where they have to hang up a bunch of weird art to cover up blemishes. I share that because I think it's pretty obvious that if I were to reject that master painter's advice, it would be an example of pride, and the bad kind of pride, right? I'm so unable to admit my own inadequacies, my own limitations, my own lack of training, that I can't admit when I've done a bad job at something. That's a clear case of pride. But I think it also helps us understand how insidious pride can be in the ways that Genesis 3 talks about. The reason that we often call pride the root of sin goes back to church fathers and mothers who were trying to figure out a way to take sin seriously in their own lives. In fact, the so-called 7 deadly sins list that we have is not a list that comes out of Scripture. It's a list that church mothers and fathers put together as a guide to confessional, a guide for them when they sat before God and they tried to say, I want to be like God so much that I want to go through my life in this very systematic way and look at every part of my life for sin. So they created a sort of like categorization or a taxonomy of sinfulness that they called the 7 deadly sins. And they talked about pride as the root sin out of which all other sin grows. They think that whatever pride is so dangerous and so deadly that if we don't address it, it will actually sprout and turn into all of these other kinds of sin. But that can't be true if pride is just being cocky, which is, I think, what we usually reduce pride to. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 3. You have a man and a woman that were put in this beautiful garden that is full of, Genesis tells us, every kind of tree. And God specifically says you can eat of any tree in the garden except for this one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So the 2 special trees that we know were there were the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And that's actually a tree we're allowed to eat from, the tree of life. It's just this other one, this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is a Hebrew way of saying the knowledge of everything, right? So God had this vision for humanity to live together in community in this garden, in harmony with the created world, and in connection to God. And for all of that to work together, it required, in God's vision, that God be God, that we be humanity, and that the world be the world, and we all live together in this kind of beautiful harmony. That God is the one who has the mastery of good and evil, that knows all things, that understands how everything in this beautiful creation fits together and functions together. The temptation that the man and the woman take when they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is not that they think they're better than God. In fact, they know that they're not as good as God. They want to become like God, knowing good and evil, knowing everything. They want to become the masters of their own destiny. They want to set the rules for themselves. They want to decide what is good and what is evil, what is right and what is wrong, what is helpful and what is harmful. They want to become like God, not better than God, but like God. And so they eat the fruit. Friends, this is pride, not simply saying, oh, I'm better than everyone else, but it's the desire to set ourselves up as the final judge and arbiter of what is good and what is true and what is holy. It's the decision that we know best, not God. And that can actually look a lot like humility if we're not careful. There are some people who read as very humble who actually are very prideful because in their humility, they are insisting on their own way. They are insisting on their particular vision of the world, on their particular ethic or morality. And so we have to be very careful that we don't conflate pride and arrogance. Arrogance is one of the sprouts that pride can grow, but so is false humility, which is actually what we're going to talk about next week. So in our beacons this week, we're going to have a conversation about pride, about the deep and true nature of pride, about why it is a root sin that can give rise to so many other things. And we're going to talk about how to spot it when it can, in fact, be so insidious. I look forward to having that conversation with you, and I hope in the time between now and then, you find that God is with you in a particularly noticeable way.